Dumelang, welcome to Face the Nation. My name is Clement Manyatela. Great to have you with us here on SABC News. On the show tonight, is AfriForum against the BELA Act because it pushes for the transformation of the basic education sector, or is it because it is draconian and takes away the powers of SGBs to decide on language and admissions at schools? The lobby group led a march today, joined by the DA, the Freedom Front Plus and other organizations, raising a concern that the BELA Act poses a serious threat to the cultural survival of the Afrikaans-speaking community. Their march today was described as the biggest protest from the Afrikaans community since 1994. AfriForum CEO Kallie Kriel speaks to us tonight. Also on the show, are Gauteng water woes self-inflicted? Well, most parts of the province have been battling with water cuts in recent weeks, and the Minister of Water and Sanitation, Pemmy Majodina, says there were warnings as early as June to the municipalities. She'll speak to us. And then later, are Americans going to elect the first ever female US president in history, or are they going to return Donald Trump to the White House? Voting continues in America this hour. What's in it for us? Our correspondent, Sharon Bryce Peace, will join us for that chat. But first, my comment. So there was a public show of unity today among several parties and organizations against the BELA Act. AfriForum was actually leading that march, joined by the Democratic Alliance, the Freedom Front Plus, and other organizations. And their concern is that the BELA Act poses a serious threat to the cultural survival of the Afrikaans-speaking community. They chose an interesting venue for their march, by the way. The protest started at the Voortrekker Monument to Freedom Park in Pretoria, and it's been described as the biggest protest from the Afrikaans community since 1994. Here's AfriForum explaining what exactly they have issues with regarding this BELA Act and why they decided to march today.
We had to send out a very clear message to government that we will not stand by while Afrikaans schools and Afrikaans children are being targeted. If you target Afrikaans schools, you're targeting the existence of a cultural community. So this is a fight for survival, and I think this is a historic occasion.
So the DA has also long opposed clauses 4 and 5 of the bill. Remember, Basic Education Minister Siviwe Kwagube, who is from the DA, boycotted the president's event when the bill was being signed into law. The DA says their biggest concern really is that the clauses give the state too much control over who gets an education at any particular school and in what language. The DA leader, John Steenhuisen, explained earlier today why he participated in the protest and why this should not be seen as an act of defiance against President Cyril Ramaphosa.
We are standing firm on this particular matter, and we continue to do so. It's not about the president, it's about clause 4 and 5. And the president has shown leadership by delaying the implementation because he understands clearly that there's consultation that needs to take place. And I'm very confident we'll be able to find each other, because that's what this next few weeks is going to be about. It's about compromising on all sides to be able to make sure that we end up with a situation that is amenable to everybody in the process.
Well, Gauteng McKenzie was also there, the sports minister. He accepted the memorandum on behalf of President Cyril Ramaphosa.
The President, Cyril Ramaphosa, asked us, myself and John Steenhuisen and Peter Groenewald, which parts is it that you don't like? Nobody pressurized him, nobody put a gun to his head. He said, we don't like, we said part 4 and 5. He took it out. Now, just the fact that he took it out for me, that shows that the government of national unity is working. That shows you have a hearing precedent. So
all right, so you've heard from those who organized this protest. You've heard from those who joined the protest. Where do you fall in this debate? The DA and AfriForum believe that this act is draconian. They believe that it will reduce the influence of school governing bodies because government would have the final authority on language and admissions in schools. So it's centralizing the power of the state. But the ANC believes that this bill is important for the transformation of the South African basic education sector. So they say the bill removes that loophole that allowed SGBs to exclude learners from admission based on race. They also believe that the act will ensure the accommodation of South Africa's official languages and address the historical injustice of forcing learners whose mother tongue was neither Afrikaans or English to study in these languages. The president, by the way, has since delayed the full implementation of the act for 3 months, and I think it's for those 2 specific clauses. But one wonders what happens after the 3 months actually lapse. What do you think of today's protest led by AfriForum? Do you believe it does put pressure on the president? And what action must the president take now that he has already signed the bill into law? You can send us a WhatsApp voice note on 078 459 1897 to share your views with us. Remember to tell us your name and surname and where you're sending that voice note from. Alternatively, you can send us an X on @FaceTheNation SABC. After the break, we'll start that conversation with AfriForum CEO Kallie Kriel. Welcome back. Now, scores of AfriForum and Solidarity members descended on the Voortrekker Monument earlier today in Pretoria to oppose the BELA Act. Both civil organization groups say that the clauses 4 and 5 of the BELA Act take away the right of school governing bodies to make important decisions about admissions and language. AfriForum's CEO Kallie Kriel is joining us tonight on Face the Nation in studio. Kallie, thank you so much for making time for us. Good evening.
Good evening, Clement. It's great being here.
Yeah. So the protest today has been described as the biggest protest from the Afrikaans community since 1994. Why did you decide to take to the streets like this and send this loud message against this act?
Yes, well, I think the fact that it's the biggest protest also shows that it's the biggest issue or the biggest problem that the Afrikaans-speaking community has encountered since 1994. And I think people should remember the Afrikaans community don't have traditional areas where their language and culture can thrive. Schools play a central role within the cultural communities. And therefore, for us, this is not simply just the act that we disagree on. It's actually a fight for survival in terms of the cultural communities. And unlike what some people try to portray, this is not a white issue. The fact is the majority of speakers are Afrikaans, are colored people. So this is a broader issue. But then again, what we need to take further, it's not only Afrikaans that will diminish. If Section 4 and 5 is being promulgated, it will also hinder the growth of other indigenous languages. We want the BELA bill to be changed to say that there's an obligation on the education department to systematically introduce mother tongue education for all children. We know children only get mother tongue education, children from African language, until the 3rd grade. And the result of that is devastating. If you look at what happens in the matric exams, only a few students, Afrikaans and English, write it in their mother tongue. And the fact is, if you have to write subjects like maths and science in English, which is your 3rd or 4th language, the fact is your maths knowledge is not being tested, it's your language knowledge. So our fight is to say, don't diminish the role of Afrikaans, rather grow other languages. And that is why BELA needs to change.
So to be clear, this is not just about protecting Afrikaans as a language. This is about ensuring South African children, whether they're Afrikaans or not, can study in their mother tongue and not be subjected to studying in a language that they don't speak at home.
That's correct, because the momentum we see at the moment is towards the Anglicization of schools. In terms of Afrikaans schools, what we've seen, and that also happened in university, if you have one big, strong international language, the playing field is not level. So what you would see is that if you say, well, we're only going to bring in English, and that is the argument sometimes used, saying, no, don't worry about Afrikaans. But history shows, and reality shows, whenever you do that, there's a process, and in the end it becomes single English, single medium schools or institutions. So we are seeing a process of Anglicization of all schools, and we want to say let's move in the opposite direction. There is a place for English, but it's a fallacy that you have to go to school in English to be able to work in English. We see Chinese people study in Mandarin, but they compete economically in an English world. And we see that with regard to many Afrikaans-speaking people. So we need to make sure that there is a mind shift towards mother tongue education.
Yeah. So there are children, school children as we speak now, that don't have a choice but also to study in Afrikaans, because the schools that they go to, even though at home their mother tongue is one of the vernacular languages, the schools they go there to force them to study in Afrikaans. Is that fair for those children?
No, it's definitely not fair. But the problem is we should not be selective. The same problem applies to an English school, and nobody ever says make sure that English schools get other mediums of instruction. It seems like there's a picking on Afrikaans schools, and it is a fallacy to say that English is not the language of discrimination Afrikaans is. We can go to any Afrikaans public school anywhere in the country, and you will see it is not exclusive schools. I know my children went to public schools. We're not private school people, and those schools are integrated. It's a fallacy that it's not the case, but the fact is, in the same way, if you say Afrikaans is discriminating, then English is also discriminating.
Isn't that because English is the medium of instruction? Well, it would be a different thing if it was Xhosa or Pedi.
Yeah, but I think we should go onto a process to make sure that we get other indigenous languages also as a language of tuition.
Yeah.
And it was not always so for Afrikaans. You know, this effort to kill off Afrikaans is not something new. In 1825 already, Lord Charles Somerset said, he made a declaration that English should be the only language in schools. Lord Alfred Milner did the same in 1902 after the Anglo-Boer War. But of course, fortunately, we're not going to let ourselves be defeated. Mr. Lesotho is also going to fail.
Yeah. But I wanted to say, you speak of what happened then in, is it 1805?
1825.
Yeah, and then we experienced apartheid in this country, where Afrikaans was literally shoved down the throats of people. Which is what has also, I mean, I did Afrikaans in school. I didn't want to do it, but I was forced to do it because that was part of the school policy. Why do SGBs then decide like that when the communities where the schools are located are not Afrikaans speaking? How is that decision being made by the SGBs on which language actually becomes the official language in the school? Well, because what I've observed, what I've observed is that there are areas where the school will be located that is an Afrikaans school, but the majority of people in those areas don't speak Afrikaans, and yet the schools adopt Afrikaans as an official language. That's exclusionary to the people who live in that area.
Okay, maybe I should just start off by saying to force anybody, a language onto anybody is wrong. And that, in terms of 1976, I cannot change history, but you cannot force people to speak a language. But now the same people that had the problem with that now doesn't have a problem if you are going to force people to speak English, because that's the same principle.
But English is the medium of instruction. That's a universal language. It's different.
Well, we have 12 official languages in the country, and whoever decided that English should now be the only official language. The fact is there are many people that struggle to speak English. We had a visit to KwaZulu-Natal with regard to the Zulu Kingdom, and in many of those places, those children have never spoken English. Now they get the first 3 years of their education in isiZulu, and then when they go to grade 4, they now have to start speaking this language called English. And then in grade 4, you have to write the test, the international test, to see how is the literacy going. So that is the problem. In terms of schools in communities that have changed totally. Nobody ever said empty Afrikaans school should be remained an Afrikaans school. And fortunately, the courts have given some clear guidelines here. In Ermelo, the Constitutional Court said this school was not full, and if there's open class spaces in your school and you say, well, you can't come to this school, that is unfair. But then you get another example of Oorverval, where the then MEC of Education in Gauteng, Premier Lesofie, forced the school to change its language policy, even though the school was full and there were open spaces in nearby schools. So the problem we have is not that we want to stop any form of fairness. We want to promote fairness, but we don't want to give a loaded gun to somebody that has an anti-Afrikaans agenda.
Yeah.
And BELA can be a loaded gun in this regard.
But how do you address then the issue of, because I've seen, I mean, you go to the Pretoria High, Boys High, and you look at the community around. There are people that live in Sunnyside that are much closer to the school that are unable to get in because of the policy about the official language that they have adopted. So what I'm asking is, this right and influence you give wholeheartedly to the SGBs sometimes works out against community members where the schools are located, which is where government says, we want to actually come in and see if we're not going to be able to regulate that. Because as we speak now, there are schools where community members are unable to attend those schools because of that aspect of Afrikaans as an adopted language policy.
I think it's a fallacy that many people think school governing bodies can do as they wish. That is not the case. It's the current or the previous wording of BELA or of the South African Schools Act states quite clearly that the school governing body has to act within the framework of the Constitution. So that means the school cannot discriminate on the basis of race, and that means if they don't adhere to that, then the government can go to court, as they did in Ermelo, as they did in Rivonia, and then the court adjudicates. But now that balance is taken away. If we speak about cooperative governance, it means that there's a partnership. That's a constitutional principle. And the Constitutional Court in both Rivonia and Ermelo said, this is a cooperative model where there should be cooperation between parents and the school governing bodies that they elect, as well as the provincial education department, and there should be that balance. But what happens now, and that is BELA, the new wording has gone too far. It gives the decision, the final decision, in the hands not of a panel or any, it gives the final decision in the hands of a single official
in the government. But you have a right to take that decision to court also if you're not happy with it. If that single person acts unconstitutionally, you can also approach the courts to
that is so.
That.
But now you have a David and Goliath situation. Schools lack funds. So you have this government, well-resourced, that can appoint the best lawyers and advocates, and then you tell the school, well, we're going to be able to do what we want, and then you have to go that route. We say rather have the role the other way around, and that would bring the balance.
Schools have the support of lobby groups like yourselves. I mean, there are other organizations that may be supporting for other mother tongues to be adopted in schools. There are organizations like yours or the DA that have got some funds that can challenge these decisions.
Yeah, unfortunately, we wish we had the funds that people think we have. We sometimes have to provide services, but we don't get taxpayers' money. We don't have big international funders, even big business in South Africa, they don't give us a cent. So we focus on middle-class, normal people. We're not an elite organization. The reason why we can take on some cases is because it's crowdfunding, many people each giving a bit. But your resources will be stretched. We can only support one school at a time. And with this new BELA, Mr. Lesofie, when he was MEC, had a list of 127 schools that he said he's going to target. So that is impossible just to try and help 127 schools. So we believe the old Act was good with regard to the balance. It lacked that it did not provide for the promotion of mother tongue education more broad. So if we're going to have a look again at section 4 and 5 of BELA, we should also say let's put an obligation on the education department to make sure that they develop indigenous languages. And of course that won't happen overnight. The Afrikaans, it took decades to get to that point. But if you don't start now, you're not going to get there.
Yeah.
So
isn't that what the BELA Act is trying to do, though, to also promote some of the indigenous languages, the vernacular languages? Because ultimately, if the education department tells SGBs, please make sure that the primary consideration is the community where the school is located. If the larger part of that community, let's say for argument's sake, speaks isiXhosa, then that can be adopted as one of the vernacular languages in the school, which is not the case at the moment.
Yeah, but the wording that we see now, the new wording with regard to BELA, actually takes the momentum away from mother tongue education. And the Act should say that. That's why the proposals we have, because we are busy with negotiations with a number of parties and stakeholders, it should say a school governing body can decide if, for instance, 80% of a school's children are isiZulu, they can decide on the language policy to say, we want to introduce isiZulu as a language of tuition. But now at the moment they can't decide that. It has to be some official elsewhere. So we say give the parents the right to decide on mother tongue education.
The government says the official that is going to be making this call will focus on that principle of this is what the community speaks. Therefore, the school that's located there should at least respond to that.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that's not our experience. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. And how we've seen, especially in Gauteng, we have highly politicized officials that drive a specific agenda. And if they were serious about that, they would have gone to an English school and say, bring in Sepedi or bring in Setswana or whatever language, but they don't do that.
Do you think Afrikaans communities would be accepting of, let's say, Pretoria Boys High changes their school policy and says they're adding Sepedi together with English?
Yeah, one of our proposals would be also, and we have made that proposal in our negotiations, is that every school should have 3 languages as a subject in schools. Because it's to the detriment of all children if they don't learn to speak the language of other children. So our proposal would be that that be made compulsory from grade 4 to grade 9, so that you have an opportunity for children to learn other languages. So our view is not to keep languages out. We just don't want our language to be destroyed by just simply making everything
What about
English.
the official language, though? Do you think Afrikaans communities would be comfortable with sending their kids to a school located in an area where isiXhosa or isiPedi is largely spoken and that gets adopted as the official language?
Well, the fact is they can do that, but I would not tell them to go and do so. Just in the same way, I would not ask and think it's a good idea for a isiZulu parent to send their child to an English school. And that is simple because research has shown that if a student studies in any other language than their mother tongue, they are negatively affected. And we can say we want to target inequalities in the country, which I think is important. We need to make sure that we target what can we do to make sure that we stop poverty. But you are setting up children for failure. If you are going to tell a child in the KwaZulu-Natal Midlands where English is not heard, to now do grade 4, grade 5, grade 2, up until grade 12 in English, Do you think that's fair?
It's not, but I think it's become acceptable because that's a universal language. So even at home, you start teaching your children English. When they get to crash, some of them, if they're not in the rural areas, you know, you're beginning to teach them English. Not necessarily so much Sepedi more or Afrikaans more, because you understand where they're going to be playing, where that language is important. I guess what I'm asking is, there are kids right now who are from homes that speak Sepedi, that speak Xhosa, and they are being taught in Afrikaans. So to your point, it's unfair, because that's not the language. So why are we comfortable with that system continuing now? Because as we speak now, there are thousands of children out there, millions in fact, that are in schools that have adopted Afrikaans as an official language, and they come from homes where they don't speak Afrikaans. In fact, even the community where they live, where that school is located, is not Afrikaans speaking in the majority.
Afrikaans schools are less than 5% of schools in this country. So you're not going to solve the lack of access to quality mother tongue education by attacking Afrikaans schools. That is not going to happen. Parents should also know, of course, you need to learn English. My children speak much better English than I do, even though they studied in Afrikaans, because they see television and programs on social media. So it's also a fallacy to think you have to let your child do their schooling in English to adapt to the bigger world. Sometimes it's not correct, because if they don't make sure that they fully understand maths and science and the concepts, it doesn't matter if they then get better at English. They won't be able to do those, to implement those concepts. So our view is to say, if you study in your mother tongue, you can apply this better in English. Chris Barnard studied in Afrikaans. He was able to do a heart transplant. Johan Rupert studied in Afrikaans, but is now an international businessman. And I think if we bring that message across to parents to say, rather build your child's knowledge, and then they can apply it in another
All right, I'm out of time. Just quickly, the president has now suspended the controversial clauses, the implementation of those clauses. Have you engaged with him? And what are you expecting him to do? Because the bill is already signed. It's an act of law. The president doesn't have powers to just suddenly cancel clause 4 and clause 5. The matter must go through the parliamentary processes.
Yes.
Do you guys really believe him when he says, oh, I've suspended these clauses until we can have consultations? Because it doesn't matter whether you guys agree or not in those consultations. He doesn't have the power to cancel those clauses. It's now law. Well, the fact is, it has not been promulgated. So the old act still applies. BELA has not been promulgated. So as we speak, it is not an implemented act. And it can, some sections of that can remain the same until these discussions are made. But I think it is possible to get a wide buy-in and get a win-win solution if we see that we can get solutions that is to the benefit of all children. And we speak widely. We even had consultations with the PAC the other day. And we speak with all parties that are in the government of national unity. We're not a party politically aligned. We have other aspirations, so we're not in the government of national unity, but we have to influence those parties to get a solution. All right, Kallie Kriel, CEO at AfriForum, thank you so much for speaking to us tonight on Face the Nation. Thank you, it was great speaking to you. After the break, we'll have a conversation with the Minister of Water and Sanitation, Pemmy Majodina. Stay with us here on Face the Nation. Welcome back. The question we've been asking you on Face the Nation tonight is, what do you think of today's protest led by AfriForum? Do you believe it puts pressure on the president? What action do you think the president must take now that he has actually already signed that bill into law? Let's take a look at some of your tweets that have come through. Yamka says, I think it's fair what they stand for. are standing for their home language. I think the problem is government not investing in other languages. This is actually hindering the development of home languages. Even in African languages fall behind in terms of use and development in NLP. Proudly South African says they are afraid that the implementation of the BELA Act will offer fruitful skills that will emancipate black people just like it does to their private school system of education. Morales says, I attended the protest today. I think I sent the right message about the concerns some sections of our populations have with the BELA Act. Our freedom struggle was never about the oppression of others. The ANC had 30 years to develop other official languages. Thank you so much for your tweets. We also have some of the questions that have come through, voice notes that have come through, responding to the question that I've asked you tonight. Let's take a listen to some of the WhatsApp voice notes.
Good evening, Clement and the viewers. The BELA Act is now law and it must be taken as the law. Everyone must respect it. The president must just relax, and we are running the country. The country must run with the NGU, Government of National Unity. We must run. That's it.
Sam Alekotri Kopis Clement Dumela. Allowing every child to receive education in official language or the language of their choice is confusing. The best statement would say every child must be taught in their home language. When our children are taught, say for instance, maths, is as good as being taught two subjects, maths itself and English, which was not supposed to be an issue. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for your inputs this evening. Let's move to this now. Water and Sanitation Minister Pemmy Majodina has reiterated that the water crisis in Gauteng is self-inflicted. She says municipalities were warned as early as June to take care of the water infrastructure in the province. This as most parts of the province have been battling with water cuts in recent weeks. The minister joins us now via Teams. Minister, thank you so much for making time for us on Face the Nation. Good evening.
Good evening to you, Clement, and all viewers.
So most parts of the Gauteng province, as you have seen, have been battling water cuts recently. You have said that this water crisis in Gauteng is self-inflicted, that municipalities were warned as early as June to take care of the water infrastructure in the province. Is this a blame game?
Not at all. It is not a blame game. Thank you very much for this question. The fact is, all municipalities are not investing on the water infrastructure. They are not maintaining their water infrastructure. And therefore, the current water infrastructure is unable to take the volume of water and be able to give the communities. If you look at Gauteng and part of KZN, there's a lot of water leaks, non-revenue water, you get water running down the street. There are no enforcement of violations, a lot of illegal connection, and that on its own has made us to be where we are now in Gauteng. Hence, we have put Gauteng on restriction level 1. So they must do maintenance and operate their water infrastructure properly.
Yeah. But then the issue of water infrastructure is not just going to be fixed from June until now when we experience these challenges. It's not going to take a few months. You cited a growing population in the province, the economy, the decaying infrastructure that has played into the Gauteng water crisis. But then urban migration has been happening for years. And I don't think that there have actually been proper plans to support the expansion of water infrastructure. This kind of maintenance you speak of should have taken place a long time ago.
Yes, it was supposed to take place a long time ago. That is why they are getting the municipal infrastructure grant. That is why they are getting equitable share. And all municipalities, without any exception, they don't invest If you are to maintain your infrastructure every time, then you'll be able to meet the requirements of your demands. But whilst you are saying this cannot take a minute, we agree with you, but it has been left for a long time, not attended to. Now, these are the results. Clement, you know, you drive the car. If you don't maintain your car, the car will knock, the engine will knock. Therefore, it is important that at certain intervals, you undertake maintenance of your infrastructure.
But then this is the problem, Minister, that we have seen across the board. It's not just water infrastructure that this government has failed to maintain, it's electricity infrastructure as well. That's why we've dealt with the kind of load shedding we've dealt with. Thank goodness we haven't had load shedding for over 200 days. But I think broadly speaking, this speaks to the failure of government to attend to some of these pressing issues. They wake up much later when we are deep in crisis and they want to complain about the lack of maintenance when it's actually been them that failed to plan properly ahead of time.
I agree with you that intervals of maintenance must happen at all times. That is why now we had to come closer as the Department of Water. Remember, it is not our responsibility as the Department of Water to provide water. It is the responsibility of municipalities. We provide the water resource. We build dams, but municipalities are supposed to do reticulation up to the tap. So if we have that water resource, but they are unable to reticulate up to the tap, then we'll have to come in. Hence, we're coming in now to save the country, not to go on zero or on day zero, because we are not in drought. Let me explain that. We are not in drought in Gauteng, but it is the whole issue of water management. What is lacking is water management. Unfortunately, people who get chased when there are such things is the politicians, whereas there are people who are employed to do that. The question is, do we have right people with requisite skills and capacity to be in the positions where they are? If they are unable to monitor and see that at this particular point, we need maintenance. That is the challenge that we have.
Has that question gotten an answer? Have you tried as the minister to try and see if in fact these state institutions have the right people who are qualified, people that are going to understand their responsibilities and not fail and want to respond later when there's already a crisis?
In municipalities, you'll be aware that, Clement, that municipalities is an independent sphere. We are not oversighting municipalities as the Department of Water. Municipalities are oversighted by COGTA, but ourselves and COGTA and National Treasury were agreeing that there are, according to the AG's report, there are no people who have requisite skills that have been employed in most of municipalities. Hence, they neglect the issue of maintenance. They lack engineers. Some of the municipalities, they even come to the department to say, give us engineers. And it is not part of our mandate. Our mandate is to give them support when they do water provision. But currently, we are caught up in a situation where the infrastructure is unable to respond to the demands of water.
Yeah. So I hear when you say there's no drought currently in Gauteng, is there sufficient water storage and for how long? Is it there for the next 6 months? Is it there for the next 9 months? What can you share with us?
The country water balance is fine. We're still going to have water up until 2030, not unless we don't fix these challenges that I've spoken about. We might see water crisis. At the moment, we don't have a crisis in terms of drought. We are still going to have water. Gauteng is still going to have water. We have agreed with the Premier of Gauteng and all mayors and MEC that between now and the next month, they are attending to all the things that make them not to have water. Gauteng is over-consuming water, not because that water rich communities. But that water is lost and in the system. So we must just follow and click on the water value system to ensure that from the source to the water treatment plant to the reservoir to the tap, there are no leaks. Once we attend to that, and these things, Clement, they are doable. They are doable. You close leaks, you disconnect illegal connections, you enforce bylaws, you bill correctly. That is doable. It does not need a year for you to attend to
but
that.
If it's so doable, Minister, why hasn't it been done? I've had so many conversations with ministers of water and sanitation who have said similar things that you are saying now over the years. So if it's so doable and so simple, why has government just failed to do it?
Clement, with the water infrastructure in local government, we cannot be instructive. So we can intervene as we are doing now. We are intervening now because we agree with you that this has not been done for years, and now it becomes a crisis. And I'm not going to defend anything. We have not done well in terms of government at all levels. But the Constitution is very clear: who must provide water. So if that the local government is unable to provide water as per Section 27 of the Constitution, we must assist them in terms of, we give them grants as part of intervention, and some of those grants are not spent even now. So it is all issue of bad governance in some municipalities. Hence, we are working with to ensure that we turn around the situation. The situation is not very pleasing, I must admit.
All right. Thank you so much for making time for us this evening on Face the Nation. That's the Minister of Water and Sanitation, Pemmy Majodina. Let's wrap up the show with this story now. The world is closely watching as voters choose between Democratic nominee Kamala Harris and Republican contender Donald Trump in one of the most fiercely contested U.S. presidential elections in recent history. This as voting is currently underway in several states of the U.S. African nations are among those watching closely as they wonder how the election outcome will impact their continent. SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce Peace is reporting live from Manhattan for us and joins us now live. Sherwin, thank you so much for making time for us on Face the Nation this evening. How is the voting going so far in different states, and what time are we expecting voting to close tonight?
Pretty smooth where we are, Clement, in Midtown Manhattan, but I have seen reports in places like Pennsylvania, right, one of those key swing states, long lines at universities in the state of Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania in particular. I've seen video of the long lines, and one imagines that is emblematic of what we are seeing in a number of swing states, given just how close the polls are indicating this race will come down to, right? It's going to come down to the 7 swing states, given the traditional strongholds that both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party enjoy. So New York will go to Kamala Harris and Texas will probably go to Donald Trump. But that only gets you to so many electoral college votes. So your Michigans, you know, states that go both blue some election cycles and then red another election cycle, essentially the purple states, the swing states, that's where the game is at. Yeah. And so to get to 270 votes, the threshold required to win a U.S. election in terms of the electoral college, they will need to win as many, a collection of swing states, your Georgias, your North Carolinas, your Pennsylvanias, Wisconsin, Michigans, and the early indication about the trajectory of this race will come from those eastern seaboard swing states. So we are looking to get an idea early in the night, once those polls close at 7 p.m. On the eastern seaboard, what those swing states are telling us. Is it going to be, you know, within the margin of error? Is it going to lean left towards Kamala Harris? Is it going to lean right? North Carolina and Georgia is going to give us the first indication of just how close the swing states are going to be. Yeah. You asked me when the polls are going to close. There are 6 time zones in the United States. Here in New York, it will close at 9 p.m. tonight, so we have still a long way to go. And of course, you have places like Alaska and Hawaii that are only going to close at around 8 a.m. South African time tomorrow morning, so around 1 a.m. Eastern time here. So we have a whole day ahead of us, Clement.
Yeah, I hope you're taking lots of energy drinks and lots of coffee there. The race between these two candidates, Sharon, has been quite a tight one. And no one can really say with certainty who is going to the White House. What are the different polls saying? Not that they haven't gotten it wrong before.
Well, the polls are a snapshot in time, and there have been so many polls from different polling outfits that it's actually difficult to pass through the noise. What has been consistent, though, is that both nationally and in the swing states, this race has been framed as a dead heat and a photo finish right until the end. What we don't know here is where the margin of error lands, right? All the polling has shown a dead heat race, but within the margin of error between sometimes 2% and 5%. To what extent does that 2 to 5% favor a Kamala Harris in this election? To what extent does that 2 to 5% favor a Donald Trump in this election? So there are three iterations I can give you about how tonight is going to go. Three scenarios. The first scenario is that it's heavily in favor of Donald Trump, and he wins by a landslide. The other version is the opposite of that. Kamala Harris is favored by the margin of error and takes Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, and this election is essentially over at that point. Or the polls are pretty much accurate. And so we probably will go late into the night in places like Pennsylvania, which is a key swing state that both campaigns have spent a lot of capital and a lot of money and a lot of time in. And so if it's very, very tight, we could be at this for a few days, given the example that 2020 teaches us. In 2020, Pennsylvania only announced its result on the Saturday after the Tuesday of that week when the election was held. And so we might be at this for days to come if the polls are accurate. But as you correctly point out, sometimes the polls are wrong. The polls told us Hillary Clinton was going to win in 2016. Yeah. Who was the president? Donald Trump. Even though Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, the Electoral College is where the game is at. And so those are the three scenarios that might play out tonight. Yeah,
there's no doubt that there's a lot that hinges on the outcome of this presidential election. This is the biggest economy in the world. If the U.S. coughs, we all catch fire. There are obviously implications here for NATO, for the United Nations, the World Health Organization, climate agreements, you name it, especially if Trump wins. What can we expect from a Kamala Harris presidency? Is it more of the same? Because recently she said in an interview that her presidency won't be a continuation of the Biden presidency. What can we expect?
Well, she almost has to say that, right? She has been the vice president to Joe Biden for the last 3.5 years, and he essentially tapped her with his resignation in July this year, and putting her on the top of the ticket, and with him exiting the race. And so we will very likely see more of a continuation were a Harris administration to replace the Biden administration, which she is a central figure in. What we do know about history and what Donald Trump's presidency taught us, that he is not very invested in the idea of multilateralism. You saw him withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Change Agreement. You saw him withdraw the United States from the JCPOA, which is the Iran nuclear deal that was painstakingly negotiated by his predecessor, Barack Obama. He even withdrew the United States from the Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council sitting in Geneva. So there is quiet concern amongst the UN Secretariat, the likes of Antonio Guterres and all his undersecretary generals and the staff of the United Nations, about the implications of what a Trump presidency might mean for multilateralism writ large. There has been re-engagement during the Biden administration. He rejoined the Paris Climate Change Agreement. They haven't been able to figure out the Iran nuclear deal. Those talks still continue. But the U.S. did rejoin the Human Rights Council. And so Democrats are certainly seen as more engaging in multilateral processes, more engaged in terms of, the multilateral nature of global governance. And the United States, as the largest economy, would be a key peg in terms of being able to address issues like climate change, address issues like pandemic responsiveness, when you think about the leadership of the World Health Organization. So very different versions and visions of America were a Kamala Harris or a Donald Trump to win the White House here. Yeah.
What are the implications for us as South Africa and, of course, the African continent if things do go Trump's way, especially given how he ran or did things when he was in Washington at the White House? Are we looking at implications for AGOA here? Will we be under pressure as South Africa on who we're friends with, so our geopolitical positioning somehow comes under pressure?
It's the Republican House of Representatives that passed legislation, right? The SA-US Review the Bilateral Review Act, based on South Africa's foreign policy positions, be that Ukraine, be that taking Israel to the International Court of Justice as it relates to the ongoing war in Gaza. So we understand also that a Donald Trump presidency, and a Donald Trump in particular as an individual, is a transactional president that wants to make America great again and not make the world great again. So where Donald Trump will fall in terms of, renewal of AGOA remains to be seen. Remember, though, that both AGOA and legislation like PEPFAR had bipartisan support in the U.S. Congress. This is not a Republican or a Democratic initiative. There has been consensus around the U.S. foreign policy in that regard. And, of course, there are benefits to U.S. companies, right? South Africa will tell you that there are 600 American companies invested in South Africa, and that this, the benefit runs two ways. And so how Donald Trump, if he were to regain the White House, if Republicans were to have control of both the House and the Senate, that could spell disaster for South Africa's re-inclusion in AGOA, because that is a legislation that has already been passed by Republicans who control the House of Representatives. It didn't go any further in the Senate or the White House because you had Democrats in charge there. If that calculus changes, the calculus in terms of who is included in AGOA might also change. The other thing I would mention is that, for example, if you look at the Biden administration excluding Uganda after that draconian LGBTQ plus law that was passed in that country. So very human rights centric approach by the Biden administration, whereas Trump might be a little different. It might be more transactional. What can I get if I give you this? And that's, the details and the parameters of that are unknown for now. But very different versions and visions that we can certainly prophesy would certainly be the case.
Yeah. What are the voters saying on the ground about the possibility of any of these three scenarios that you gave us, Sherwin, tonight? I heard Trump the other day telling supporters that if Democrats win, it will be due to fraud. And there are so many unprecedented things that happen in the lead up to this moment we find ourselves in. And we know what happened the last time when Trump lost. What sense are you getting from the voters on the ground who are supporting both these candidates?
If you support Donald Trump as an American, you don't really care about what happened on January 6th. That is obviously evident. And a lot of people, based on the polling, support Donald Trump. So him instigating his criminal indictments, the various federal indictments as it relates to election interference, the state election case in the state of Georgia, the classified documents case, do not matter. I spoke to a number of voters in Manhattan, which is a bastion of the Democratic Party, and a lot of people told me that they were voting for Donald Trump because they want greater border security. They believe he would be better on the economy. But I also equally spoke to a number of voters who said they wanted a return to civility in the political discourse. They believe in a woman's right to choose. They believe in reproductive rights, and hold Donald Trump responsible for the gutting of the federal right to abortion based on his appointments to the U.S. Supreme Court. And of course, that precedent-setting ruling in 2020 that undermined 50 years of precedent in terms of the federal right to abortion in the United States. This is a very diverse electorate. This is we live in a big city here in New York City. There are rural parts of the United States that are quite different, right? With different perspectives and different aspirations and different desires. And so that really does inform that private moment when people go into one of those ballot boxes behind me and make that personal decision. There's been some discussion about whether women, for example, in Republican-leaning states married to Republican men that will be voting for Donald Trump, whether they will be honest with their husbands that they secretly are going to vote for Kamala Harris because they believe that reproductive restrictions go too far in this country. So there's a plethora of issues that will drive voters to the polling station, how those numbers fall, how the demographics show up. You know, in the early voting, some 75 million people voted. The numbers, the gender gap was 54% women, 44% men. Does that portend well for Kamala Harris that has made access to abortion and, you know, doing away with restrictions a central peg of her campaign? Maybe. But a lot of women are also supporting Donald Trump, so we have to wait for the numbers to come in. All right. Sean and Bryce, please, thank you so much for giving us the latest live to us from Manhattan in New York. Thanks to you for watching the Tuesday edition of Face the Nation. We'll be back with you on Thursday at 8 p.m. Thanks for watching. Cheers.